Hello, everybody, and welcome to day 36 of the longing. I just realized that my microphone was in a weird position. I'm going to move it back. Hopefully my voice will probably didn't, might have sounded a little worse last time, and now will sound a little better because now it is facing me more. But anyway, we're back and we are still reading the Tao-te Ching. Or is it Tao-te Ching? I don't feel like scrolling up to read the title. The famous, well, it's the super old religious Taoist piece that is translated a bunch of times, and I'm reading one of those translations and trying to dissect it as best as I can because I was told by a friend to try doing so, and why not? Let's go for it. This is belonging. We can do anything we want to. We're on a part 11. The 30 spokes unite in the one nave, but it is on the empty space for the axle that the use of the wheel depends. Clay is fashioned into vessels, but it is on their empty hollowness that their use depends. The door and windows are cut out from the walls to form an apartment, but it is on the empty space within that its use depends. Therefore, what has a positive existence serves for profitable adaptation, and what has not that for actual usefulness. Let me just make sure that good. Again, this feels like that feels like a line that is so open-ended that you could take that 100 different ways. Part 12. Colors 5 hues from the eyes their sight will take. Music's 5 notes the ears as deaf can make. The flavors 5 deprive the mouth of taste. The chariot course and the wild hunting waste make mad the mind, and objects rare and strange, sought for, men's conduct, will to evil change. Therefore the sage seeks to satisfy the craving of the belly, and not the insatiable longing of the eyes. He puts from him the latter, and prefers to seek the former. I don't get it. Part 13. Favor and disgrace would seem equally to be feared. Honor and great calamity to be regarded as personal conditions of the same kind. What is meant by speaking thus of favor and disgrace? Disgrace is being in a low position after the enjoyment of favor. The getting that favor leads to the apprehension of losing it, and losing it leads to the fear of still greater calamity. This is what is meant by saying that favor and disgrace would seem equally to be feared. And what is meant by saying that honor and great calamity are to be similarly regarded as personal conditions. What makes me liable to great calamity is my having the body, which I call myself. And if I had not the body, what great calamity could come to me? That immediately kind of... I know that I think probably the natural thing that most people would think of here is it's going towards, again, that meditation idea of and also some of those Buddhist sort of ideas, or at least I'm familiar with them more from the Buddhist perspective of the heart of all despair and all negativity is desire, and this would take it a step further and say the heart of desire is the body. And if that's the case, that seems very anti-natalist, very anti-life. But I'm not necessarily saying that that's wrong. I'm just surprised to see that here. Therefore he who would administer the kingdom, honoring it as he honors his own person, may be employed to govern it. And he who would administer it with the love which he bears to his own person may be entrusted with it. The fact that this is still part of the same part 13 makes me that I don't really get it. Maybe I completely misunderstood the above lines. Part 14. We look at it, and we do not see it, and we name it the equable. We listen to it, and we do not hear it, and we name it the inaudible. We try to grasp it, and do not get hold of it, and we name it the subtle. With these 3 qualities, it cannot be made the subject of description, and hence we blend them together and obtain the one. Its upper part is not bright, and its lower part is not obscure. Ceaseless in its action, it yet cannot be named, and then it again returns and becomes nothing. This is called the form of the formless, and the semblance of the invisible. This is called the fleeting and indeterminable. We meet it and do not see its front. We follow it and do not see its back. When we can lay hold of the Tao, of old to direct the things of the present day, and are able to know it as it was of old in the beginning, this is called unwinding the clue of Tao. When we lay hold of the Tao of old to direct the things of the present day, able to know it as it will in me. Okay, no, I've tried to understand that by rereading it. I didn't get it. But, this kind of reminds me, let's see, kind of just lost my thought. This whole thing about the Tao being unnameable and unknowable and all that, like, I kind of, like, I can understand how that could be useful, but I also, the pessimist in me just says, well, like, this just means that, like, this is so much more marketable to a large group of people, which, like, it seems the intention of this is to cause order. And so, like, from that perspective, it seems like the intention of this is to just make this whole idea as and all of these principles as easily marketable and as easily for people to think, like, wow, I really believe in this, because, like, whatever I feel must be what they're talking about, and people can just say, well, sure, why not, because this is unknowable, so sure, why not. But yeah, it's just sort of, you can convince a lot of people if you're this vague, that's what I'm getting at. Part 15. The skillful masters of the Tao, in old times, with a subtle and exquisite penetration, comprehended its mysteries, and were deep, also, so as to elude men's knowledge. As they were thus beyond men's knowledge, I will make an effort to describe of what sort they appeared to be. Shrinking looked they, like those who were wade through a stream in winter, irresolute like those who are afraid of all around them, brave like a guest in awe of his host, evanescent like ice that is melting away, unpretentious like wood that has not been fashioned into anything, vacant like a valley, and dull like muddy water. That was a lot of things, and I don't know if any of those things particularly seem to be held together by any particular quality. Who can make the muddy water clear? Let it be still, and it will gradually become clear. Who can secure the condition of rest? Let movement go on, and the condition of rest will gradually arise. Yeah, that makes sense, arguing that that things will get better without work, and that sometimes trying too hard at something will make it worse. If you compare it in this metaphor to a muddy water that needs to settle, that is sometimes true. Sometimes. They who preserve this method of the Tao do not wish to be full of themselves. It is through their not being full of themselves that they can afford to seem worn and not appear new and complete. Part 16. The state of vacancy should be brought to the utmost degree, and that of stillness guarded with unwearying vigor. All things alike go through their processes of activity, and then we see them return to their original state. When things in the vegetable world have displayed their luxuriant growth, we see each of them return to its root. This returning to their root is what we call the state of stillness, and that stillness may be called a reporting that they have fulfilled their appointed end. Interesting. A whole lot of metaphors in this, and I guess that's probably normal for most religious texts, but I like that interesting metaphor regardless of how I feel about its actual usage. I think that's a beautiful metaphor to compare, I guess, if I assume that this is talking about, like, meditation through clearing of the mind, like a root vegetable going through a period of dormancy and fulfilling its purpose through that. You could also maybe probably bring in a cycle of life and death into that sort of nature idea it's coming into. The report of that fulfillment is the regular unchanging rule. To know that unchanging rule is to be intelligent. Not to know it leads to wild movements and evil issues. The knowledge of that unchanging rule produces a grand capacity and forbearance, and that capacity and forbearance leads to a community of feeling with all things. From this community of feeling comes a kingliness of character, and he who is king-like goes on to be heavenly. In that likeness to heaven, he possesses the Tao. Possessed of the Tao, he endures long, and to the end of his bodily life is exempt from all danger of decay. So much of that whole basically worship of government that you get with this sort of Eastern philosophy, Chinese philosophy. It's very pervasive. I see that. Part 17. In the highest antiquity, the people did not know that there were their rulers. In the next age, they loved them and praised them. Yeah, just like I said. In the next, they feared them. In the next, they despised them. Thus it was that, when faith in the Tao was deficient in the rulers, a want of faith in them ensued in the people. How irresolute did those earliest rulers appear, showing by their reticence the importance which they set upon their words. Their work was done, and their undertakings were successful, while the people all said, "We are as we are, of ourselves." Irresolute. I can't remember if irresolute is a good thing or not here. I can't remember. But it felt like this is trying to talk about like that. It's almost got that feeling of people saying like, "Oh, things were so much better in the old days of antiquity," and like there was like people used to talk about the Roman Empire. Now people in, for instance, America, they're like, "Oh, things were so much better before when we have like the government, the founding fathers. How did it get to this point?" But in some level, I think part of that is all like you remember the good times and you don't remember all the shitty stuff. And that's what comes out through history. And so it appears like even here in ancient China, it appears that people are all like, "Oh, things were so great, the rulers were great, and everybody loved them, and now they despise them, and the next they despise them." So I wonder about that whole thing. Part 18. When the great Tao, way or method, ceased to be observed, benevolence and righteousness came into vogue. Then appeared wisdom and shrewdness, and then ensued great hypocrisy. When harmony no longer prevailed throughout the 6 kinships, filial sons found their manifestation. When the states and clans fell into disorder, loyal ministers appeared. I assume a whole bunch of this stuff like is super dependent on like that actual what did actually happen historically around and before the time that this was written. And I am no Chinese historian. I know almost nothing. So from that perspective, it's hard to know if I have to know that stuff to get this, or if some of this is trying to be a timeless idea. But it doesn't appear that way. It appears to me that it's written more as a perspective based on a very specific history. And from I guess the Chinese perspective, they sort of saw themselves as the center of the world, if I understand it correctly. So I guess from that perspective, if you consider yourself the center of the world, then having something about your own history would be timeless because it is completely about what matters. But yeah, I guess that's an interesting thought. Part 19. If we could renounce our sageness and discard our wisdom, it would be better for the people 100-fold. If we could renounce our benevolence and discard our righteousness, the people would again become filial and kindly. If we could renounce our artful contrivances and discard our scheming for gain, there would be no thieves nor robbers. Those 3 methods of government, thought olden ways in elegance did fail, and made these names their want of worth to veil. But simple views and courses plain and true would selfish ends and many lusts eschew. So that first part, again, this is bringing me back to what I was reading in Zarathustra. And if you're just reading this and you haven't seen me doing Zarathustra, I didn't actually finish it because I thought that I didn't realize that it was split into multiple books, and I was like, fuck that. I don't feel like reading the whole thing right now. But from what I did read, it reminds me of like the thing that Zarathustra said, kind of. He was sort of disparagingly that there are people who just want to return to being animals, and yeah, that seems to be what they're renounce our sageness and discard our wisdom. Yeah, that seems to almost be what it's going for here. Yeah, I don't know what to say about that. Part 20. When we renounce learning, we have no troubles. The ready yes and flattering yea. Small is the difference they display, but mark their issues good and ill. What space the gulf between shall fill? What all men fear is indeed to be feared, but how wide and without end is the range of questions asking to be discussed? The multitude of men look satisfied and pleased, as if enjoying a full banquet, as if mounted on a tower in spring. I alone seem listless and still, my desires having as yet given no indication of their presence. I am like an infant which has not yet smiled. I look dejected and forlorn, as if I had no home to go to. The multitude of men all have enough and to spare. I alone seem to have lost everything. My mind is that of a stupid man. I am in a state of chaos. Ordinary men look bright and intelligent, while I alone seem to be benighted. They look full of discrimination, while I alone am dull and confused. I seem to be carried about as on the sea, drifting as if I had nowhere to rest. All men have their spheres of action, while I alone seem dull and incapable, like a rude borderer. Thus, I alone am different from other men, but I value the nursing mother, the Tao. With that line, I can't help but wonder if, with that, the perspective, the I, referring to the self, is that referring to the author of this text, or is it supposed to be taken as, I could also see it taken as, everyone feels when they look at themselves, everyone feels alone, and as if everything feels different to them, like everyone feels as if, looking outward, that everyone else seems as if they have everything together. But so that would be sort of understandable if it's coming from that perspective. If it's coming from the actual perspective of literally it's the author, that's a little bit harder for me to wrap my head around, if he's just sort of ranting about his own feelings, or just sort of, that seems out of place for this text so far. But I think, again, I'm going to stop it here, but before I do, I just want to mention this whole thing, the more I'm reading it, the more it feels sort of like sort of like the opposite of a lot of the ideas portrayed in Zarathustra. And while I really felt like I didn't like a lot of the ideas portrayed in Zarathustra, hearing the opposite of those ideas, I don't feel like I like those either. Like, when I was hearing it from Zarathustra's perspective, like, or Nietzsche's perspective, I kind of thought, like, oh, that's kind of bullshit. I kind of was doing what, in a separate episode, what I was saying about the straw man thing, where, like, I was kind of doing what I myself have said is kind of stupid, that I was acting as if, yeah, Nietzsche, nobody really thinks that. But no, like, you got these religious texts where people really do think, voice crack, really do think these things. And that are like these ultimate scenarios that are like the opposite. And seeing those, if I understand more where Nietzsche would be coming from that perspective, but they still, to me, seem like intense opposite ends of a spectrum. So the obvious would be balance, and this whole text, I would assume, through Taoism, is supposed to be moving towards balance, but it doesn't feel balanced. It feels very much biased towards a very specific perspective. But we'll continue next time. See you later.